Hello, everybody. This is Darren Redmond, and I'm with Erin Khar again for the first time. Actually, the second time, but nobody's keeping score at home. And if you are, get a hobby. Anyway, Erin Khar, thank you for being my guest today. You are the author of really one of three, and I'll go over that in a minute. I think multimedia, whether in your case and with David Post's case, books that really speak to addiction and recovery and trauma and all that goes in a way that has never been done before. And that's not hyperbole. That is just fact. You live this kind of world, and I'm in that as well. And your voice, February 5th, 2020, your book comes out, HarperCollins, and it immediately, maybe not immediately, but very quickly has an effect on people because you changed the paradigm, you changed the conversation. So, Erin Khar is the author of Stung Out. I strongly suggest, and on my social media, I'm going to be putting my suggestions for the holidays. This is a book, whether you have somebody who's going through anything or not. One, it's just brilliantly written. Two, it's from somebody who has an advice column. You can't go wrong with that. But I'm going to start there. Erin, when you put out Stung Out, and again, it's called Stung Out, One Last Hit and the Lies That Nearly Killed Me. So accurate.
They actually changed the subtitle for the paperback.
Yeah, why did they do that? Did they do that with your blessing, or was it like?
Yeah,
hey,
they said we want to do this, and I said okay. Part of it was that my book came out like on 25th of February, so 10 days like before everything shut down. And I think the paperback came out in it was August 31st, but a September release of 2021. They wanted the cover, like you can see the two covers. They wanted a new cover and a new subtitle so that it felt like more uplifting and hopeful. I think because we were in, mid-pandemic in such like a weird transitional period.
Marketing, nothing wrong with that.
Marketing. But I really do love the original subtitle too.
Me too. And the wonderful blue version right behind you is the one I have in my house. Right. And by the way, this really is a book, people, that you should pass on to other people and read. Well, here's an idea: just buy them a copy. Let's help the author and the publisher and everybody else. But because it's just good information to have. And but did you have any idea that your book would really have a paradigm shift or help create a paradigm shift as much as it has?
Of course, like I hoped that it would spark conversation. And there's like two parts of it. It's like there's a part of me, like the writer part of me, that like, of course you want your work to be successful. But like beyond that, I think what became increasingly important to me was the effect that it had on the people who read it. And I definitely heard from a lot of people who had experienced addiction and felt really sort of seen and understood and whatnot. But the thing that I have been overwhelmingly pleased by, and thank you for the kind words about the book, it really means a lot. The thing that has been so wonderful is hearing from people who have never experienced addiction firsthand. They might have like somebody in their extended family who's struggled with addiction, and they've written to me and said that they couldn't believe how much they related to in the book, even though they hadn't struggled with addiction.
Right.
And I think that's really important because I think that we, historically have tended to put alcoholism and addiction sort of like as this sidecar to mental health issues. And it's really at its heart, has the same sort of internal mechanisms as anxiety, depression, all of these other sorts of things that a lot of people struggle with.
No, listen, and all you have to do is walk in the world, and you're going to meet a lot of people who are struggling with a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
And the old way of looking at things that said, you tough it up, stiff up the lip, keep going.
Mm-hmm.
People love, way before Twitter and way before social media, we love cookie cuttering people. We love to template people and would say, well, you're being weak. No, what we're being is being honest. very strong. Like when I saw my dad go through his alcoholism, when I drove him to detox, the strongest point I've ever seen him in his life, 20-year New York City policeman, U.S. Marshal after that, was when he was crying, giving me his wedding ring. And I said to him, I said, this is the strongest I've ever seen you in your weakest moment, because you allowed me to
Right.
see that strength. You know, and we as a culture need to continue to embrace that, because we can't ask people to go inside and face whatever it is they're facing if we're asking them also, by the way, I don't want to be inconvenienced with your pity party, so don't tell me. Well,
Right.
no, you can't have it both ways.
Right.
So what I was going to say in my long-winded way earlier was, I believe that David Post's book, The Weight of Air, and put out by Sandra Jones Publishing, which, by the way, won 2022 Independent Press Award. And I bring him up because we both really admired him. And in a weird, sort of unfortunate way, is it's through his passing that you and I got to meet.
Right.
And I know that you too changed the way that I viewed a lot of this stuff. And then I suggest people get these books, get Weight of Air, get Strung Out, and then I would suggest to see the movie Body Brokers, to see what goes on in a lot of these treatment centers.
Right.
The pay to play kind of thing, and it's just the whole. And they might not want you to get well, everybody. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
As long as that insurance card works, let's keep pumping that. And by the way, there are great places as well, don't get me wrong. But the three of you, in the case of Body Brokers, John Swab and Jeremy M. Rosen, with Roxwell Films, you put out movies that were works of art, rather, creativity, that speak in a different way. And you guys did not collaborate in the corner somewhere.
Right.
So I just found that very interesting, that there are people who, all of a sudden harm reduction. Well, it's very organic, actually. That people are saying, you know what, after 105 years of doing things the same way, it's not working.
Right.
It's not working. So, when you look back, if you don't mind me asking you this, are you amazed that kind of your story is resonating, and then others have similar stories, and you all at the same time are telling the same story?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it doesn't surprise me. I think what surprises me is that it took us so long to talk about it. I mean, I think, our sort of model for treating recovery since, the first half of the 20th century has been based on like a 12-step model. And while that works for some people, and it's certainly, look, it saved my life at a certain point, but it wasn't the ultimate answer for me. I think that it can be really, really helpful for people in conjunction with other things. But I think that there is this sort of black and white thinking historically about the only way to treat addiction is this way. And that has led to the deaths of many, many people.
Way too many. And
yeah,
it's interesting because the other, not to be a quote unquote shill for these wonderful people that are creating, in early January, Mary Beth O'Connor has a wonderful book coming out called From Junkie to Judge. And she talks directly about what you're talking about. 12 steps didn't work for her.
Right.
But other things do.
Right.
And I think that's so important that we let people know that you're not a failure if this doesn't work for you.
And I've had conversations. I have friends who are, deeply entrenched in 12-step recovery, and who've asked me like, well, did you really work the steps in earnest? And when I tell you that, like, I was in so much emotional and mental distress in sobriety, I worked those steps to the best of my ability, and I really wanted it. It wasn't that I didn't want it or I wasn't ready. I really, really wanted it. But I had issues that weren't going to be solved by doing the step work. And they certainly laid a foundation for me, but I really needed to address what was at the core of the issue, and I think that one of the missteps in how we've treated addiction is that we've relied so heavily on the disease model that we in some ways have discounted treating the actual cause for many folks. I don't believe that every single person who struggles with alcoholism and addiction, that it's just genetic, and the second they take a drink, they're off and running. For some people, that is the case. But we know from looking at brain scans how trauma rewires our neural pathways.
Yep.
And, you know, for me, which I've said many times, like I turned toward drugs, and in my case, heroin, so that I wouldn't kill myself. I mean, it was it worked in the sense that it kept me alive until it stopped working, right? This is why we develop maladaptive coping mechanisms, is because we don't have other coping skills at our disposal. The good news is that I think that with different forms of cognitive behavioral therapy, we rewire those neural pathways. So it doesn't become a life sentence of I'm going to be an addict and alcoholic my whole life, and it's always going to be like this, and I'm always going to be sick. I don't look at myself today as a sick person.
You're not. And
and I don't have I don't mind like referring to myself as an addict, but I also am like, I'm not an addict anymore. It's been 20 years in March since I used drugs. So, but I'm also like, I don't see any difference between me and somebody who is on long-term, medicated assisted treatment, whether it's methadone or Suboxone, buprenorphine, whatever. It's none of my business. I don't care. Like, if that's their recovery, and I think that's such an important shift that's started in treatment, is that, we've had to look at harm reduction because, in 2021, we lost I've seen two numbers, 107,000 or 120,000. So, well over 100,000.
Yeah, no, I get it. And listen, one of the things I did right before we started to record this conversation was I took my blood pressure medicine.
Mm-hmm.
So you take your Suboxone.
Right.
Who cares?
I don't care.
You're living, you're breathing, you're helping your family,
mm-hmm.
whatever the case may be.
Mm-hmm.
I really get concerned when people just love labeling.
Mm-hmm.
He's an addict. And listen, bouncing in New York City, we have that similar background with New York, right?
Mm-hmm.
And going to clubs, and let me tell you something. People would say to me sometimes, well, you stayed away from drugs. You were smart enough. No, you want reality? Reality was I was too poor to buy them.
Right.
Right. So, well, don't, let's stop bullshitting, right? Let's just call reality. Like, I was just struggling to get by. That's why beer worked for me.
Right.
Because if I had the money, I would have been there too. So let's stop trying to kind of label and put, and like you said, somebody hasn't had, a drug in 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, who hasn't had a illegal drug, because they're probably still taking cholesterol medicine. And so you can really start cutting that baby up.
Look, I have ADHD, and I take medication for my ADHD that's a stimulant. I don't get high off of it, but there are plenty of people in the recovery community who think that if you take ADHD medication, you're not sober. And I think that's complete BS, because I have seen people, especially now with this, the shortage with Adderall, there are people who have extreme trouble getting their medication, and they start to completely fall apart in other areas of their life, which often leads people back to illicit drugs as a substitute for the medication that they need. And I think that that's a really important distinction. The same way that I don't believe we should deny people who are in pain medication.
Agreed.
Like I had surgery. I had a completion thyroidectomy in June, and they gave me, drugs in the hospital, and I had some when I came home. I'm really careful about it, not because fortunately or unfortunately, I think I used up all my fun receptors, because when I had to take pain medication, it doesn't I don't get the release that I used to get. And
Right.
I'm so like, the second that I feel that effect, my next thought is like withdrawal. So
Mhm.
I don't like to take it for more than a couple days because I'm so, the idea of even going through withdrawal because you had a dependence from like a surgery is so frightening to me that I would rather just be in discomfort. And I think, but again, somebody who has pain, that's not my place, and it shouldn't be the DEA's place to decide
I
if somebody
totally
needs pain
agree.
medication, because our, you know, I've talked about this a lot, as much as we want to blame, you know, drugs coming in over the borders or dealers or whatever, it's complete BS. We have the overdose crisis we have because of the policies carried out by the Drug Enforcement Agency. 100%. We are not going to solve this problem until we stop trying to go after the people who are making and supplying the drugs and start treating the reason that there's a demand for them.
Yeah, and we're gonna, and until we stop telling people. And you said something, and I'm sorry because I love to be prepared. You were on a wonderful podcast 4 days ago,
Mhm.
and a young woman, and I wanted to give her a shout out as well because it's great, and because I'm a
Oh,
big
on
believer in that.
Alyssa Alters. Yeah,
Alyssa
Alter Your
Alters,
Life.
that's
Yeah,
it. Yes,
yeah,
and Alter Life, which I love that name, by the way. And I'm a big fan of. You know what? Let's support each other instead of saying,
right,
"Oh, can't mention that name."
right.
She did a great job, and you mentioned some of that stuff there, and it's so important for people to realize that, hey, here's reality. Reality is that if it's not the guy who got injured. You said this so eloquently the other day
Hmm.
on Ultra Show. It's not the person who got injured and now they become an addict. It's
Hmm.
more like they're in pain, and then for whatever reason you take them off it, and now where we're going to go? And you're going to go to the kid that has the
Right,
press. Or you're going to go to somebody up the street,
right,
and the biggest drug pusher in America and I'm talking to hyperbole, but
right,
is grandma's medicine cabinet,
right.
is your parents' medicine cabinet.
Hmm.
And again, my favorite glass of whiskey is the next one with my cigar. But
Hmm.
this is where we learn this stuff.
Hmm.
And we have to say that. And it's something else that you said on when you and I spoke on the previous podcast I had,
Hmm.
which is so true. And this is something that you spoke about, and I loved hearing it. You are selling a book, quote unquote,
Hmm.
and you're looking at the people who may buy your book and saying, you're part of the problem.
Hmm.
This didn't become an issue until people who had, blonde hair, blue eyes, and white skin started seeing
Right,
the effects. And
right,
and thank you,
right.
because that's just reality. And it's not
Yeah.
not blaming, it's just reality. It is.
Hmm.
That's like saying the toast is burnt because it's burnt. You're
Right,
gonna blame it. It is. And
right,
it didn't seem to become an issue
right.
until all of a sudden it started happening in
Hmm.
upper middle class white America.
Right, of course. I mean, at the time that I was using, part of the reason I got away from it with it for so long is that it was, pre-opioid crisis. I mean, I was still using when the opioid crisis started, but it was before it became so, we really started cracking down on things. And so I didn't come from the type of family, I didn't look like what people thought a drug addict looked like in the beginning. You know what I
Right.
mean? I for a long time hid it
I didn't
because
start that way.
I was in a prep school. Had lots of friends. Came from like a quote unquote good family, all of those things. So I was an anomaly. And now obviously we see that's different. I mean, it's the good news, bad news. The good news is that like now the hope is, and it's part of like the work that I do in advocacy, is that there really is a bipartisan effort in terms of looking at our failed drug policies and increasing treatment options for people. And that's really my goal, is to educate as many people, regardless of political affiliation, on what
Great.
needs to be done to stymie this problem. Because even if you don't care about the addicts, like somebody who's like, I don't care, these people are weak, they made these choices, the economic repercussions on us as a whole are enormous. And if you just look at the data, spending the money on prevention and then long-term treatment. And by long-term treatment, I don't mean rehab, I mean the long-term aftercare with mental health services that are needed, that should be subsidized. If we spent the money there, we'd be spending a whole lot less money in the other areas that to address social problems. And that's just, you just can look at the numbers and see that. So it makes economic sense if that's what drives people. It makes sense in terms of I believe that we are as sick as our sickest members of society. So, if we're not taking care of people, that shows the health of us as a society. And you're right, something you said at the beginning about this idea of suck it up, blah, blah, blah. We very much, sort of have this long standing American ethos of pulling ourselves up by the bootstraps, but that doesn't work the same for everybody, dependent on all of these other factors, like mental health issues, like being born into systemic poverty, like racism, like other cultural issues. I mean, it's just, people might not like it, but that is true.
Yeah, it's very interesting when people, and again, the word truth could be somewhat nebulous to some people, but what you're talking about is just truth. It's just fact. You just look at it. And it's interesting because part of the American ethos is also, I want the truth. I'm going to find the truth, unless it's inconvenient, of course.
Right. Oh, yeah.
Right. And I think that's where you coming out the way you did with your book is a double-edged sword, because I was able to see it on the other side, because, the same people that at first, when I was trying to give away Narcan for free, and in a community that was all upper middle class white people, they want nothing to do with it. What do you say? My kid's sick, but this or that, whatever the case may be. Then they see you, and they're like, wait a minute, that's me. So it's what I call realistic modeling, and that's it's needed. It's important, because then they're like, wait a minute.
One of the things that's happened since the book came out is I've spoken to so many parents who've lost kids to overdose, and these are accidental overdoses. Some of these kids had substance use issues. Some of them really didn't. They were experimenting. I've talked to parents who've lost 14, 15, 16-year-old kids that came from good families, quote unquote, right? So I know that it's challenging for parents to think that, to kind of confront the concept that their kid would, turn to drugs, try drugs, whatever. Sure, not all of us wish that they, wouldn't, but we know the decisions that we made. And it wasn't just people who turned out to be addicts, it's people who also experimented. I mean, I'm Generation X, and I think I was listening to Maya Salovitz on a podcast, and now I'm trying to remember what the statistic was, but it was 80% of Gen Xers tried cocaine at least once. Okay. That's a really high percentage. And if that same percentage existed today, then we would, there's, how much of the cocaine in major cities has fentanyl in it, a large percentage. So it's just, it's a different time. It's a different world. And I think that in terms of drug education with our children, it's about, giving them very neutral information about substances. This, the idea that we should make fentanyl a weapon of mass destruction, this is bullshit. I mean, fentanyl as a medication was created for severe pain. They give fentanyl in ambulances all the time, right? When somebody has had some sort of traumatic injury, but it's measured and legal and serves a purpose, right?
Yes.
The reason that we have so much fentanyl in the market is not because drug dealers want to kill their clients. It's because it's a much less risk to have small amounts of chemicals to create this compound than to have an agricultural crop for heroin or cocaine, which is a much greater risk, right? So my point being that like I don't ever want to demonize any substance.
I love where you're going, because we're of the
It's
same
not like,
mindset.
it's like, I don't care if somebody wants to smoke pot or somebody wants to drink. I don't care. I don't care. I mean, truth be told, I don't really care if somebody, there's people like Dr. Carl Hart, Columbia professor, who's written about this a lot, about using heroin casually, right? Like a couple times a year.
He got
But
he got torched.
He does so in like Switzerland with like pharmaceutical grade heroin, right? This is not the same thing. And that wouldn't work for me, but I don't care. What do I care if he does? It doesn't affect me at all, right? So my point being that like the information that I give my children, that I give parents when they ask like how they should broach the subject, first of all, I mean, well, going back, I think that drug education starts way earlier. It starts with not ever mentioning drugs. It starts with talking about emotional regulation, modeling emotional regulation, which we all, even those of us who've been through a lot of therapy, we all struggle with emotional regulation when we're under stress, right? I've gotten better and better and better at it, which is the good news, right? Because I've had a lot of therapy, a lot of cognitive behavioral therapy, and a lot of practice, because I see the result for myself and for the people around me when I model good coping skills. So it's talking to our kids about whatever it is we struggled with at the age that they're at, without demanding that they tell us anything, because it creates a line of communication where they trust us because we've trusted them with information without demanding anything. And then when we do give them information about actual substances, giving neutral information about substances, and then educating them in harm reduction, not as a green light to go use drugs. With my older son, I made him do naloxone training with me. In the state of New York, you can do an online training. They send you you get like a little certification, which also comes with liability insurance and everything. I ordered a large amount of fentanyl testing strips, which are also available. It depends on the state, but they're available free from a lot of harm reduction organizations. I put them in his backpack. He's in college. He's here in New York, but he's in college. And, he kind of rolled his eyes at first. I'm like, it's not even that I think you're going to need it necessarily, but the chances of you or a friend at some point you're going out. He's had friends who've they've gone out and taken Molly. Well, at a certain point, 40% of the Molly in New York City had fentanyl in it. So I wanted him to know, so not just for himself, but for other people, how would you test if you have a pill? How do you test it for fentanyl? So you have the information that may not stop somebody from doing it, but it will at the very least maybe make them take it at a slower rate. And then having naloxone. It's just common sense. And I think this is something that we, in terms of having the conversations about harm reduction, really happen 5th or 6th grade before they get to middle school.
I once again, I totally agree. And you and David put me down that path. I definitely, with the naloxone, I get much less pushback now. And
yeah.
Very, very, I go to a lot of schools now, and I'm talking about junior high, and
right.
And it's interesting because the new line is on the fentanyl test strips. People are like, no, because it's just I'm uncomfortable. And I'm like, you used to be uncomfortable in naloxone.
Right.
It's a tool.
Right.
Put it in your shed. You just,
right.
You never know. You may want it. You may have to have it. And then there are people and again, I just use old New York, sitting in the tavern kind of methodology. They'll say, well, you're just sending the kids to use it. I'm saying, no, listen, let me tell you how kids work. You were a kid, I was a kid. If they're even thinking about it, they're going to do it. Most likely. And they're there, and I want them to think that there's something wrong there. You might as well say, why are you wearing a seatbelt? You're going to just give them a license to drive faster.
Right.
And they get it most of the time. I want to talk, because we both have to go soon, but I want to talk a little bit about Ask Erin. I love that. I'm on your social all the time. That almost seems like a labor of love.
It is. I mean, there was a time. So I started it in 2009 on my old blog on Blogspot. And then, it was on a website called Ravishly for several years. And then when I left Ravishly, I just had it on my own website. And now I have a Substack, which I have yet to monetize, but will be adding like a paid tier. I'm still going to make the column free for every subscriber. I have about 10,000 subscribers. But I'd like to offer like some additional benefits for paid prescribers, so that for a few dollars a month, that like, you know, there's a chat feature on Substack, and be able to like have more engagement that way. But it is a labor of love. I mean, I've been doing it for so long, like I can't even imagine ever giving it up. And I feel like it's not even just a responsibility, but I feel privileged that there are so many people who trust me with
You earn that, my friend.
their lives, with their, you know, when I say their lives, I don't mean like I'm
No.
saving their life, but I mean with the information in their lives. And, you know, I get a lot of questions. I can't answer them all. And one of the things that I hope to do with the Substack, like doing like sort of rapid fire answers, is being
Mhm.
able to answer more questions, because I answer one a week and I get, you know, an average of 30, 40 questions a week now. So it's impossible for me to get to all of them. But yeah, it is definitely a labor of love.
So I'm going to ask you one question in
Mhm,
that realm before I
mhm,
let you go. And this kind of ties into everything we're talking about. So, what do you say to that person, whether they're just entering recovery,
mhm,
they're not in recovery yet, or the young person who's just leaving college? Like our sons are just about the same
mhm,
age.
mhm,
Um, and they're just trying to figure out the world. And
mhm,
here's specifically what I mean. Don't be obstinate. Don't be stubborn. Make sure you take good advice. But isn't
mhm.
it funny that the people sometimes in the closest circle, they give you the worst advice and they are actually very detrimental to your progress?
Right,
How do you teach somebody to juggle that? Because there's no template to that, if I use that term that we talked about earlier.
right. I mean, I think part of it is they to some degree it has to like be learned through lived experience. But I do say this to people when they have that sort of dynamic, is that there are often times where we have codependent or unhealthy relationships with people, whether they're family members or romantic partners or friends, um, where they are under like the false impression that they need sort of you to stay unhealthy in that area, because their
Yes.
dynamics depend on it and they don't know how to function without it. It's all, you know, this is not like a conscious malicious thing, but you see it so often, you know, certainly in families where there is addiction, right? You sometimes, because of the addiction, um you know, sometimes it can predate it, but often it's born of it. There becomes this dynamic where everything is centered around this one person fucking up all the time,
Right. Right.
you
You in
know.
the center. You know,
Right.
um, I've said this before on this podcast, and I don't want to know your age, but there used to be a cartoon called
Hmm.
Klondike Cat. It used
Hmm.
to be under an underdog. And as a kid, I learned something from that sticks to actually what you're talking about right now,
Hmm.
and that's this. So Klondike Cat was hired to find this mouse called Savoir Faire.
Hmm.
Stay with me. So in one episode, he basically catches him, has
Uh-huh.
him cornered, about to apprehend him. The Savoir Faire says to Klondike Cat, listen, before you bring me in, once you do, what's going to happen to you?
Right. You're not going to be chasing me anymore.
Right. And you're not going to
Right.
be hired, and
Right.
you're not going to have a job, and you let him go. And
Right.
it's funny, relationships sort of work that way, doesn't it? To
Hmm.
your point, you need the wounded person for you to
Right.
feel somehow needed. So you
Right.
don't want them to get better,
Yeah,
you
I mean,
know?
I think I look at like sort of my romantic relationships when I was in active addiction, they were all codependent. And I think that
Mhm.
like to a large extent, those relationships and my addiction relied on that codependency, right? You know, and the good thing is that when one person changes the dynamic, changes their behavior, it forces the other person to either change their behavior or leave the relationship. Again,
Right.
not necessarily romantic, just whatever
Yeah,
the
just,
dynamic is. If you stop, it's that, like the same principle of like, if somebody's teasing you and they keep teasing you, if you stop reacting, they're going to stop teasing you. It's not because the dynamic is completely deflated. So it's
so
similar
true.
in other types of problematic relationships.
So I want to ask you this as I sign off. And again, thank you so much for your time
Sure.
today. And you're a special person to me. I
Thank
think
you.
you're saving lives. Um, Selfishly, I ask, what's next? Do we have a book, a movie? What's going on? What's next for you?
Sure. So I'm working on something TV related that I can't really talk about
No,
yet. And then I'm also working on a novel.
excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent. And I want to thank you for being my guest today. Erin Khar, you're just a rock star. And please, I know how to get you, but if people want to find you on social media, where should they look?
I'm at Erin Khar on all social media. I'm still on Twitter, although I'm less active there now. But on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram there, and then at erinkhar.com. And then on the Substack, Ask Erin.
Excellent. Which monetize. You deserve
I
to get
know,
some
I know,
change.
I know.
You
Just to, I
deserve
mean,
some
because
coin.
I was joking with somebody. I'm like, I pay an illustrator to do the illustrations,
Beautiful,
and
by the way.
and I'm like, wait, I mean, I should at least monetize it so that I'm not paying out of pocket to do
Right,
this
right,
every
right.
week.
Yeah, exactly. I shouldn't lose money on
No.
helping people. Should break even. Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much. And you have a great day.
Thank you,
You're a
you
rock
too.
star. Bye now.
Bye.